Welcome to introduction of Anthony the Saxophonist, my new podcast. And what is this podcast going to be all about? Well, I'm so glad you asked that question. I am happy to let you know that I am doing something different in podcasting now. As different as far as I am concerned, for me that is. This particular podcast is going to be centered around, one, what made me decide to play the saxophone. I started at the age of 10 years old, for one. Who are some of my influences on the saxophone, whether it be saxophonist or even vocalist or on another instrument? How I got started? Because the saxophone was not my first instrument. As a matter of fact, as a child growing up, my thing was, I wanted to be a drummer, wanted to play in the school band, wanted to play drums in the school band. But the band director at a school called Sowers Elementary in Wichita, Kansas, is no longer what it is now. But I guess word got back. I wanted to be a drummer in the school band. And, you know, when you start out playing the snare drum. I was already playing a drum set, so to speak, by the time I was in school anyway. Well, later on in school, because my dad got me some drums, because I was always using paint cans as drums. And he seen what I wanted to do, so he catered to my musical inclination. But also growing up, my church, Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, where I grew up at, and I'm still there, we had some saxophone players actually come through our church. So I'm giving them their due credit. One of them, I don't know where he's at, and one of them is deceased. But the saxophone caught my attention at a young age, at the age of 10 years old. A young man that is no longer with us. As a matter of fact, if you let my mom tell it, and she's deceased as well too, she would tell you that this man's name I'm about to mention, by the name of John Smith, and I know that sounds generic, but his name was really John Smith. He was a big, hefty guy. My mama said that he was my idol in every way, music and size-wise, because I'm a big boy myself. So, a guy named John Smith. But there was another guy that came through as well, too. Name was Reginald Jarrett. And this man would make you want to play every instrument conceivable, because he could play drums, he could play the organ, the keyboards, but that saxophone, my goodness, when he played it, he could make it say good morning, good afternoon, and good night, and you would enjoy every note that he played. Like I said, I don't know where he's at. I was fortunate enough that his son was born in our church, became a drum player as well as a vocalist. Had the opportunity to work with his son on the drums, and he turned out to be a pretty good drummer, could keep a pretty steady beat. Sometimes I had to hone him back in, like, hey, it's not about all that, just keep me a straight beat, but it is what it is. So that's how I got some of my starts. Also, I'm that one that was always hard-headed. I wish I worked on my music sight reading. It probably would have opened up a whole lot more doors. But during the summertime, I refused to look at that book that we had in my first year in school, knowing we was going to be going into a new book. I would turn on the radio, and at the time, the first rendition of Star Wars that came out actually had a little beat to it. So I started playing by ear, listening to songs and playing them by ear. And then, growing up as a child, especially when you're the son of a pastor, you go to these National Baptist Conventions, Congress, and had the opportunity at the National Convention, heard a man by the name of Bernard Johnson, who I believe is residing in Kansas City, still amongst us, praise God. He really caught my attention, and heard him play live a few times. So that's part of how I got my start, what got me interested in the saxophone. And I'm 55 years old now, and I'm still playing the saxophone, also playing the organ at church. So the saxophone is something I will probably never put down. As a matter of fact, I just recently got me a Cannonball tenor. I'm also playing on alto saxophone by Accent, the performance model. So I like both of my horns, but probably at some time eventually I will probably end up with another Cannonball alto. I have a soprano sax by Bellcrest. I passed that down to my daughter. Hopefully she's practicing on it. I'll make sure she hears this. But yeah, this is the introduction to my new podcast called Anthony the Saxophonist. Also, you will be finding out some of my favorite artists, a little biography on them, what got them started. What you won't be hearing is sound clips from those artists because of infringement and copyright laws, and I'm trying not to get in trouble. I'm trying to make sure that my podcast is compliant to the guidelines. So, yeah, this here is an introduction to Anthony the Saxophonist podcast, and I hope that you will enjoy it. Leave your suggestions, leave your comments, tell me what you think about it. Like I say, it's going to be geared on a lot of saxophonists, but also other artists such as flute players in the jazz industry, women in jazz, gospel saxophonists, maybe even some vocalists that influence how I play my saxophone. Before I end this brief introduction, back in the day, as our church used to travel to Oklahoma, Tulsa in particular, the particular church is St. John's Missionary Baptist Church. My cousin at the time was pastor in that church. We would go there, and let me just go ahead and let the cat out the bag. One of my favorite saxophonists still is to this day, David Sanborn. And you never know who listens to what type of music in and or out of church. After the service was over, and we had a good spirited service, and we had a good musician at the time too. God rest his soul, James Williams. We were getting out of church, and I seen a young lady approach my dad and was asking him about music and had he ever heard of. And I'm like, listen, what this woman know about some David Sanborn? And I heard my daddy say, well, you can go ask my son. He listens to all that music. I remember it as if it was yesterday. He said, you can go ask my son. He knows more about all that music, something to that effect. So a young lady approached me, and she said, have you ever heard of David Sanborn? I'm like, have I? I said, I got a lot of his music in my music library. She said, I thought so. She said, you sound like him. To me, that was one of the highest honors and compliments I could have ever received. But it also made me go to work on me. It's okay to sound like some of your favorites, but anyone that is listening to this podcast, young people that are playing the saxophone right now, and let me say, I have a big following over in Nigeria, believe it or not, and haven't even stepped foot over there, but I have children in Nigeria that I haven't birthed, all because of our common link, which is the saxophone. Always develop your own identity, whereas when people hear you, they know, oh, that's so-and-so. Hey, that's so-and-so. Because right now, put on Mike Phillips, I can tell you that's Mike Phillips. You put on Kenny G, I can tell you that's Kenny G. David Sanborn, after the first two notes, you know that's David Sanborn. So I will say to anybody that's up and coming on the saxophone, always develop your own identity. It's okay to listen to others. You can even pattern some of your styles after them, but make sure you let your own personality come out on your instrument. That way people will know, hey, that's such and such. That's such and such, such and such. So I hope that you will find this podcast entertaining. Like I say, I will be giving you biographies on some of my favorite artists, some of my favorite saxophone players, jazz artists, gospel artists. It's all about the sax here on Anthony the Saxophonist. Until next time, take care of yourself and be blessed. I'm out of here.